Mr. President, honorable members of the Constitutional Council, I was coming to this majestic hall. I've been looking for the seal of the Republic of Cameroon. I've been looking for this seal all over because I've been to other constitutional councils, and the majesty of it is that the seal of the Republic, what this council stands for, is right up there somewhere. But I was astonishingly surprised and realized that I rather feel to be in the annex of the campaign headquarters of a fellow candidate by virtue of the picture on the wall of my own Constitutional Council. I want to mention that this is rather unfortunate because it's not what it's supposed to be. We are here today because of an election in which we had 8 candidates and 1 head of state presented as a candidate. And yet we are pretending as if we had 9 candidates. 8 candidates, 1 head of state. 8 candidates on their own, 1 head of state using the entire government, army, police, and state resources to maintain himself in power. Just by virtue of the conduct of this election, taking cognizance of the statements put in place to maintain the incumbent in power, Your Highness, Mr. President, could have saved us all of this time we're spending here. However, history holds it that this exercise is more like what we call a knock-door ceremony, in which everyone understands the bride-to-be will leave. Call on the powers vested in you to recognize that the election for the office of President of the Republic must be national. And except the present government wants to make us understand that 8 regions have seceded from 2, what happened on the 7th of October did not concern the Cameroon for which I was a candidate. It happened only in 8 regions with the amount of fraud that all have witnessed and we have documented so far. I want you to know already today, Mr. President, that if you declare me winner of this election against the institutional coalition in place to maintain 1 candidate in power, I will refuse to be sworn in. I will refuse to be sworn in as President of the Republic, not only because this election has shown us once again that the struggle for the emancipation of the Cameroonian people that started in my hometown Douala back in 1948 is far from being attained, but because I cannot be sworn in as half a president or as the president of half a republic, a president of a republic that has seceded from 2 regions. All this, Mr. President, honorable council members, all this for the sole intention to allow 1 candidate remain in power. If Cameroon is truly one and indivisible, then Cameroon did not vote. What happened on the 7th of October is tantamount to apartheid. Apartheid being defined as an intentional means of disenfranchising the rights of 1 race or community. From the Afrikaans word apart, hood, meaning a community set aside. Let's face it, let's not be there tomorrow. 1 man, 1 vote. That is why Cameroon fought a deadly civil war for more than 10 years. That is why 6 innocent sympathizers of my party were brutally shot and killed at Liberty Square in Bamenda on the 26th of May 1990, and too many others have followed since then. May their souls rest in peace. There was nothing like one man, one vote in Cameroon for this election. Because what happened on the 7th of October 2018 was one person, one vote in 8 regions, and one person, 0 votes in 2 regions. Or if you wish it, and I hate putting it this way, because I am fundamentally against these appellations, but for the understanding of everyone in here, what happened on the 7th of October was one vote, one Anglophone, one Francophone, one vote, one Anglophone, no vote. That is not the Cameroon the Constitution asks you to defend. It is not the Cameroon you want your children. It is not the Cameroon you want for your children, sorry. You have a duty to correct this. This is why I pray and urge that you render justice, not in the interest of one of the parties to this election, not in my own interest, but in the supreme interest of the Cameroonian people, and that you remind the government of Cameroon in your decision that the Northwest and Southwest regions are a full part of their one and indivisible Cameroon. Everything has been said on the rampant and sometimes violent irregularities observed all over Cameroon. So I will spare you on this. But I would like you to note that if part of Cameroon did not vote, and if this part is Cameroon, then there was no vote in Cameroon. In the Northwest and Southwest, people were asked to go vote in polling centers. This is nowhere to be found in our electoral code. And more so, Mr. President, honorable members of the Constitutional Council, if Elekam has the guts to replace the Parliament of Cameroon, let them do it for all Cameroonians, not for part of this country. Not by virtue of where they come from or by their language or their culture. If Elekam wants Cameroonians to vote in polling centers, let it be so from Lake Chad to Mulundu. Let it be so all over the territory. Let it not be a decision stigmatizing, segregating, and marginalizing only one people. Mr. President, I needed to take a breath because, as you can see, what happened on the 7th of October is beyond normal comprehension. What happened and what they did with the polling centers is a violation of the law, of the spirit of the law, and so I can also refer to it as apartheid. I was amazed to listen to the staff of Elekam who preceded me at this pulpit, informing this August House that the presidential election is a unique electoral district. Yes, he is right. But is it not the same Elekam or Elekam staff that refused to organize elections in the Northwest and Southwest regions, including register voters? I was further flabbergasted to listen to him say polling stations all over the territory opened at 8 a.m. and closed at 6 p.m. even certifying that he operated 25,054 polling stations. First of all, I would like him to inform you where he placed all those polling stations, since he is the same person who transformed those in the Northwest and Southwest into polling centers in full violation of the law. But what is extremely disturbing, Mr. President, is that on the day of this election, and since time too long for any human rights consideration, these regions are under a curfew, and the curfew, for instance, in the Northwest, holds from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. 6 a.m., 6 p.m. every day. Those who do not respect this curfew are simply shot. The driver of the national chairman of the SDF got shot 3 days ago because he missed the curfew by 5 minutes. You cannot consider that an election has been held when the law states that polling stations are open till 6 p.m. and at 6 p.m. you have a curfew that is supposed to be respected by all. 6 p.m. means you have to be at home. Now we have polling centers, not polling stations, most of which are tens of kilometers away from home. Meaning that not only was the population of the Northwest and Southwest disenfranchised from voting up to 6 p.m. because they had to be home, but I would like anybody here with a sound mind to tell me, Mr. President, when did vote counting start? How did it happen in the middle of a curfew? How were the tally sheets? Maybe that's why they are holding no signatures. How were the tally sheets transported to the divisional vote counting commissions? Who was manning the divisional vote counting commissions? Were they all violating the law? And further to this curfew over time, there was a complete ban for transportation that I have to add to it. So it was impossible to vote even if they wanted to vote. Give me 1 hour. Okay. The more you study, the longer it will be. So, il m'oblige de le dire en français, je veux le faire. Les bureaux de vote sont censés être ouverts jusqu'à 18 h. Dans le nord-ouest et le sud-ouest, il y a un couvre-feu qui s'arrête à 18 h. Il était impossible, Monsieur le Président, que ces bureaux de vote opèrent en toute légalité parce qu'il y avait un couvre-feu qui interdisait aux gens d'être dehors à cette heure-là. Donc, le décompte du vote ne pouvait pas se tenir. Les membres de la commission locale ne pouvaient pas y être. Et encore plus grave, les PV ne pouvaient pas être transportés. Si ces gens respectaient ce couvre-feu, ne pouvaient pas être transportés vers les commissions départementales. I want to add here that in this very hall, the elections have further informed us that ballot papers were delivered to all 25,000 polling stations 1 week before the election. He said it in here. Since the Northwest and Southwest did not have polling stations, these ballot papers are most probably outside somewhere. How could people vote without ballot papers? Because they transported them to ballot stations. He himself tells us that the Northwest and Southwest doesn't have ballot stations. Where are the ballot papers for the Northwest and the Southwest, if ever it so happened that votes took place there? And we all follow CRTV because we all realized this morning that we were being embargoed on CRTV. The very CRTV on voting day was showing us helicopters transporting ballot papers in the Northwest and Southwest on the day of election, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes already in the afternoon. We have the recordings. We don't want to use it as proof. I am just trying to legitimize the fact that there was no election in the Northwest and Southwest. Further to that, in these two regions, you know that, for instance, the ring road no longer exists. I hope the honorable member of the council has informed you that 2 bridges have been cut by the secessionists, that there is no physical way, and there was no physical way to drive from Bamenda to Kumbo to Ndu to Kambe to Biame to Wum and so on. There was no physical way. Can someone in here explain to me how that voting could occur when a road that used to exist, even if someone braved the odds of stray bullets when there are no bridges? How many Cameroonian voters own a helicopter or an aircraft? Well, there is no runway up there, so you need only a helicopter. No local polling commission was regularly put in place in the northwest and southwest, as can be witnessed from the various tally sheets received. At the date these commissions were supposed to be put in place, nothing happened. The people who were assigned to preside over those local commissions, when we called them, most of them were answering from Yaoundé, Douala, or Bafoussam, some in Buea. No divisional vote counting commission could regularly be put in place, and none of these divisional vote counting commissions regularly discharge their functions. In the northwest and southwest, the army was fully used to favor one candidate. They manned the polling stations, put up one candidate's posters in the night of the 21st to the 22nd of September in full violation of an existing curfew, and were brought in, as was witnessed in Limbe, where 180 were brought in civilian attire to man polling stations. Very, very important, Mr. President, in the northwest and the southwest, the total campaign time allowed by virtue of the ongoing curfew, when by extraordinary the army allowed you get into these regions, was 180 hours. The law provides for 15 days. By virtue of this curfew, was 180 hours, minus the 48 hours of a total ban imposed by virtue of the celebration of the 1st of October, which is a high tension day in the southwest and northwest, and was known to the person who signed the decree convening the election before he signed that decree. So in the northwest and the southwest, the total de facto campaign time enjoyed by the stray dogs, the stray cats, still braving the odds to be there, because we couldn't see any human beings in these two regions, was of 132 hours, while that of the rest of Cameroon was 360 hours. Mr. President, this is what we call apartheid. Mr. President, some of the members of your Constitutional Council were unable to vote because registered either in the northwest or southwest. On the 7th of October, more than 500,000 potential voters were not allowed to vote by virtue of their status imposed by a civil war they are not a party to. 50,000 of them are refugees, and 450,000 of them, at least, I'm reducing the number because the official number is 750, are internally displaced persons. The UN system tells us that there are 140,000, but the UN system doesn't count all those who are living in the houses of your members of the Constitutional Council of that extraction living in Yaoundé, in our houses, in other houses here, And when you put all of that together, you're at 720,000, but I bring it down to 450,000 to make a round number of 500,000 displaced people who were not intentionally not allowed to vote by the Ministry of Territorial Administration and ELECAM. And it is a clear design of marginalization and disenfranchisement. We talked to the Ministry of Territorial Administration, we talked to ELECAM, we wrote to ELECAM. There was nothing rocket science that could have made it such that these people who were registered at the time of the convening of this electorate didn't register. Nothing. With a little bit of good faith, at least 200,000 more Cameroonians could have participated in this election. But they were not allowed to participate because they come from the wrong side of this country. That is the reason. That is the reason. If they came from any other side, it wouldn't have been the case. Let's face the truth. And I saw that in the response I received. Because when you address such an important issue and you receive no answer, it means the administration and ELECAM doesn't care. And it means it has been put in place by design to marginalize part of the Cameroonian population for the sake of keeping one candidate in power. I don't want to think that there is another design outside of this electoral purpose, because that's why we're here. If you add to this the 3.2 million voters disenfranchised by the fake tallies that have been presented here, you see where we go to. Mr. President, honorable members of the Council, Constitutional Council, sorry. International instruments to which our country is party require that these people, if registered, be given an opportunity to vote. We made proposals to the government and ELECAM, but again, these compatriots, these voters were intentionally marginalized. I am repeating this because I know that your decision will be in the interest of the Cameroonian people. And when you take your decision, I urge you to make sure that if we are going for another election, that ELECAM does everything in its powers that registered voters displaced by violence are given an opportunity to exercise their civic duties. Mr. President, from the aforementioned, I can conclude and say that the government and ELECAM decided to go ahead with this election to legitimate a de facto secession of our country to secure the election of one man by intentionally disenfranchising, marginalizing, and segregating the voters of two regions of Cameroon. And this is not acceptable. It needs to be corrected. Mr. President, for more than 2 years, actually for more than 1,000 days, these two regions have been subject to war. More than 5,000 Cameroonians have directly lost their lives, and a further 10,000 have indirectly lost their lives due to the absence of basic medical services and necessities. There has been, during this time, basically no voter registration going on this past 1,000 days. In those two regions, most, if not all, ELECAM offices have been closed, burned down, or are unattended. And even during the 2018 senatorial election, voters had to be heli lifted, and yet we are trying to pretend that elections held. Yes, they actually did, if it's to protect the fact that we want to justify that an election existed just to give the results that we had preconceived, yes, elections held. But such an election cannot be termed democratic, and such an election can only be considered as part of an agenda of apartheid. The governor of the Southwest region sleeps in a bunker, Mr. President, was seriously attacked when he tried to install the DO of Lebialem, and yet some people want to make us believe that they were able to organize elections in these two places. Mr. President, it has been said here over and over, but I have to insist and repeat on this, as if all of this was not enough. The Prime Minister of Cameroon and 183 of his accomplices voted in upstation Bamenda under heavy military protection on the 7th of October. According to the petition he himself addressed to the Divisional Committee, Mezam, asking for a transfer of his polling station from Oku to Bamenda, he invoked his incapacity to vote in Oku due to insecurity. Notwithstanding the availability of the entire armed forces for his security. This letter alone, filed by my councils, is proof enough for the annulation of this election. Because if the Prime Minister, with all the security at his disposal, cannot vote in his own village, then what should we hold of the normal voter who did not have the means and protection to escape the rampant insecurity in these regions? Mr. President, it has been repeated as well, but I have to come to it. Outside of the Northwest and Southwest, the gravest violation of the law, actually, the images that pushed 60% of Cameroonians not to wake up on the 7th of October, the day of voting, to remain at home because they considered the vote was done, happened when the President of the Senate, dear members of the Constitutional Council, I'm talking about the President of the Senate, the second personality of the state, the heir to the President of the Republic. When the President of the Senate flagrantly violated the law with the complicity of Elecam and the consular officers in Paris to vote, that was game over. 9 a.m., the person who is supposed to be an example for 25 million others votes in a polling station where he is not registered, where he has never been registered. He holds an office that imposes him to be registered in the West region, except you want to tell me that the decree of his appointment is null and void. He holds an office that requires him to be registered voter in the West region because senators represent a region. Mr. President, I left school some time ago, but maybe we have an 11th region called Paris. When I came here this morning, Paris was still under French control. We cannot have a registered senator in Paris. Impossible. And what happened that morning, by nature of its gravity, was a game changer for this election. Because all those who don't have trust in the election, we are trying to give credibility. All those who do not have trust in what is going on had the proof they were waiting for that this election is just a game. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Excusez-moi si je suis un peu long, c'est la gravité des faits. Si l'élection s'était bien passée, je ne serais pas là. If the Constitutional Council cannot restore constitutional order, then Cameroon is on its way towards collapse. The Constitutional Council cannot rule as being constitutionally compatible, legitimately acceptable, and historically compliable a presidential election that is not accessible, and I insist on accessibility, to an entire community living in the northwest and southwest regions, having refugees and IDPs. That we are made to believe freely joined another community sometime not too long ago in a union. And I insist on union because some will come and talk about figures. The fact, the historical fact that it is a union has all its meaning. And it means that politically we are talking of a legitimate 50% of our union, our country, to elect its president of the republic. As I earlier mentioned, let it go into your records that if I am proclaimed elected, I will refuse to be sworn in as president of half a republic. I hope whoever gets elected has the same clairvoyance. I have insisted on the intentional segregation put in place by this election, not to diminish all the other grave violations of the law during this election, but because this is subject to my understanding of our living together is the most serious of all and may place our country at the verge of collapse. Mr. President of the Constitutional Council, I call on you, I pray you, I urge you, honorable members of the Constitutional Council, to restore Cameroon's constitutional order. That order that calls on some to remind us all that Cameroon is one and indivisible. The world is watching. Our children will hold us responsible for what will come out of this session.